As the Israeli-Palestinian conflict continues, Human Rights Watch has made a gruesome discovery. Based on verified video and witness accounts, they have discovered that Israeli forces have been using white phosphorus in their military operations in Lebanon and Gaza this week. White phosphorus has the potential to cause severe burns and has long-term effects on survivors. And there are blurred lines on its use in the battlefield. Ahmed Benchemsi, Human Rights Watch Advocacy and Communications Director for the Middle East and Africa, joins us now from New York. Thank you so much, Mr. Benchemsi, for your time this evening on Essay Tonight. I want to talk first of all about the verification of these videos. So you've got several videos indicating that artillery-fired phosphorus, white phosphorus, was used on the 10th and the 11th over Gaza. But I want to ask whether these videos have been independently verified by, for instance, a munitions expert.
Yes, indeed. They have been verified by our own arms experts, because we have an arms division with experts of various sorts of weapon. And we have also a tech division that takes care of verifying the location of a video, whether it is consistent with other videos taken in the same area, with the, satellite imagery and things like that. I'm not part of that team, but I trust them 100% to do their job. So the tech team and the arms team teamed up together and worked to authenticate the video's locations. As you indicated, one was over the Gaza city port and the other one on the Israel-Lebanon border. And they both identified, the munitions as Airbus 155 millimeter white phosphorus artillery projectiles. That's very specific. We also spoke with witnesses who, saw those munitions being fired there on the field, and they also consistently describe dense white smoke, and something that is very specific of white phosphorus is a smell of garlic. It smells like garlic, and it's a very strong smell with that. So yes, we did our verifications and we can confirm these weapons have been used.
So white phosphorus projectiles can be used for smoke screens, for marking areas, for signaling. But I think the problem lies, obviously, in densely populated areas such as Gaza. It can be extremely dangerous. Can you tell us a little bit more about the risk to people when white phosphorus gas is exposed to oxygen?
That is correct. As you indicated, it can be used for marking, signaling, obscuring, as a smoke screen, if you will, or as a weapon to set fire. The problem is that this weapon, when fired over densely populated areas just like Gaza, it can severely burn people, houses, fields, other, civilian buildings or objects. And since the substance is spread over a wide distance between 125 and 250 meters, depending on the altitude of the burst, then civilians are exposed and civilian infrastructure is exposed. Now, when it touches the human flesh, it is devastating because it is highly combustible on human flesh, and it can burn, human bodies to the bone. It generates a very high temperature of up to 815 degrees, and it can also enter the bloodstream. I mean, even a very minor burn can result in the substance entering your bloodstream and causing multiple organ failure. So a very minor burn can lead to death. That's how dangerous it is.
So the use of white phosphorus magnifies the risk to civilians and violates the international humanitarian law prohibition on putting civilians at unnecessary risk. That's been a recurring theme in this conflict over the last week, where we've seen door knock policy, questions about asking civilians to leave an area. That has been discussed at length, has been done. However, this use of white phosphorus seems very much at odds with Israel's actions so far in its devastating impact on people. Is there a reasonable explanation for Israel's use of white phosphorus under the current circumstances?
I am not sure what you mean when you say it is at odds with Israel's attitude. I would, on the contrary, say that it is consistent with the lack of precautions they have been taking recently in upholding their obligation to spare civilian lives and to make sure that there is as little as possible of civilian casualties. When they blockade Gaza and they just cut off electricity food, water to more than 2 million persons, leave them in the dark, and then carpet bomb them, or their recent announcement that they're called to evacuate basically half of Gaza to the other half, which is more than 1 million persons that they are given 24 hours to evacuate, including wounded people in hospitals. This proves a blatant disregard of the safety of civilians. So no, I mean, using incendiary weapons in populated areas, it doesn't seem at odds. It seemed pretty consistent with their attitude so far, which is broadly very much disregarding of civilian lives. This is, of course, something that we denounce very strongly.
So perhaps at odds with what they've been saying they've been doing, but not so much with their actions, as you've explained. Yes. I want you to talk us through the loopholes in Protocol 3 of the Convention on Conventional Weapons on the use of white phosphorus.
Well, I mean, attacks using air-delivered incendiary weapons are prohibited under that protocol, Protocol 3 of the Convention on Conventional Weapons, because it is unlawfully indiscriminate, as I explained earlier, when it is airburst in populated urban areas. It cannot discriminate between what's on the ground when it's gonna fall down. It can fall down on a military target, but also on a civilian passing by or on a house of a civilian. Since Gaza is one of the most densely populated areas in the world, by definition, it violates the international humanitarian law, that the prohibition on putting civilians at risk. Now, white phosphorus is not prohibited per se. It is prohibited when used in such conditions, and that's what the Protocol 3 of the Convention on Conventional Weapons says. It doesn't regulate specifically white phosphorus, but all explosive weapons that are fired over densely populated areas.
However, Israel hasn't ratified Protocol 3, so is there likely to be any consequence for them using it over the Gaza in these past few days?
I mean, you don't need to ratify a protocol for international law to apply to you. Israel is a warring party and therefore is responsible of sparing civilian lives or proving that it has done its best to spare civilian lives. It has not done so far. So yes, Israel has been committing war crimes. And to be fair, Hamas also committed war crimes by abducting civilians and killing them. This is also a war crime. But you do not respond to a war crime by another war crime, which is arguably like bigger 10 times in number of projected casualties. So yeah, war crimes have been committed and there should be accountability. The International Criminal Court, which has an open investigation on the situation in the Palestinian territories, should include the latest events in its investigation. And also, ally nations should hold Israel to account. The US, Western nations. That does not look what they're doing so far, because their support of Israel seems to be pretty blind at this point, but it shouldn't be. Because, massive violations of the laws of war are being practiced, and it could get worse in the days to come.
So, important question, I think. Israel's use of white phosphorus in previous conflicts has been documented, yet there is an alternative.
Yes, we have documented before the use of white phosphorus in previous conflicts in Gaza, which was unlawful again, including in 2009. And there is an alternative, and what is interesting about the alternative is that it is a weapon that is developed by Israeli firms, so they own it, and they did already use it. In fact, Israel committed to not using white phosphorus anymore, except for two narrow exceptions that were not specified to the public. They said that they would reserve the definition of these exceptions to courts. So we don't know what they are exactly. But what we know is that Israeli authorities are very aware that this type of weapon is harmful, because they were already notified of it and they already committed to limit the use of it, and yet we just documented that they've been using it again.
So I'd like to refer to what you said a little bit earlier, that both Hamas and Israel have essentially committed war crimes in this conflict, and that's an important fact to recognize. Ultimately, the people who are paying the biggest price in this conflict are over 1 million Palestinian civilians trapped in Gaza. Who is looking out for them at the moment?
That's correct. And it's not 1 million, it's 2 million. It's 2.2 million specifically. So just picture this, 2.2 million people trapped in a very narrow strip of land that is 40 kilometers by 11 wide. It is considered as the biggest open air prison in the world. Why? Because no one can get in or get out. I mean, an exit point that is not controlled by Israel, just one, that is the border crossing with Egypt in the south. It's called Rafah. But the Israeli Air Force has been repeatedly striking it in the past days, thus signaling their clear willingness to shut it down and to prevent the people from Gaza from going out. So you have Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who goes on TV and says, I ask the people of Gaza to leave, but he knows very well that they cannot leave because he's preventing them from leaving. And then they're cutting electricity, and they're cutting water, and they're cutting food, which, by the way, is a war crime from another angle, because when you starve a population as a means of warfare, that is a war crime that you are committing, on top of collective punishment, which is also a war crime. So it's a combination of war crimes that is being committed by Israel in response to another war crime that was committed by Hamas, which consisted in killing civilians and abducting them and making them hostages.
So unfortunately, we are going to have to wrap it up. We are running out of time, but I would like to ask you one last question about the possibility of a humanitarian corridor that has been discussed numerous times over the last week. Are we any closer to seeing that happen? Is there enough international will?
I mean, I don't know the specifics of the discussions. All I can tell you is that I hope that they will get to a positive result, because the population of Gaza is in dire need of help, of resources, of water, of food, of medicine, of medical care, of all the care you can think of for a besieged population that has been cut off the rest of the world for a very long time, by the way. It's not just like since a couple of days, for 16 years. But then the situation deteriorated dramatically and tragically in the past days, and it could even become worse.
Well, thank you very much for your insights. That was Ahmed Benchemsi, the Advocacy and Communications Director for the Middle East and Africa Division at Human Rights Watch, telling us about the worrying use of white phosphorus over Gaza in the last couple of days.